Welcome to Liberty and Justice for All, Confronting Systemic Racism and Addressing Civil Unrest. My name is Tamara Nash, and I have the pleasure of serving as the ABA-YLD Diversity and Inclusion Director. Today's program is the first in a four-part series, which is centered on the division's mission to provide dynamic and diverse resources for young lawyers across our nation. This series will tackle difficult topics of racial inequity, police brutality, civil unrest, and criminal justice reform. Our division is fully committed to addressing these important issues, and we ask that you join us in the critical work left to be done. Together, we can lift up the communities we serve, lend our voices to those who have been marginalized, and unite around the common commitment of equal justice under the law. Moderating today's program will be Jerome Crawford and Michael Nguyen. Together, they serve as co-chairs of the ABA Young Lawyers Division Men of Color Project. The Men of Color Project is rooted in empowering, supporting, and engaging men of color within our profession. Their efforts lead this division in the call to action. However, before we dive into our program, I would like to take this opportunity to introduce ABA President Judy Perry Martinez to make opening remarks on behalf of the ABA. Please welcome President Perry Martinez.
Thank you, Tamara. I'm honored to join you today for this critically important discussion as we confront systemic racism in our country. And thank you to ABA past president Robert Gray for being a champion of the profession and the ABA, and for his sage counsel and friendship for almost 40 years. And to the ABA-YLD special guest today, attorney Lenita Baker. Ms. Baker, we applaud and thank you for doing what we lawyers must, taking on a case with vigor and heartfelt compassion here as you represent the family of Breonna Taylor in the aftermath of her senseless killing by police. I want to commend the young lawyer leaders of the American Bar Association, including Logan and Jerome and Michael and Tamara, among others, and the staff for stepping up to create and present this series. As the program flyer notes, young lawyers have a critical responsibility as officers of the legal system and as public citizens to pursue and ensure the quality of justice in America. These honest conversations about our profession and our country are essential if we are to move both our profession and our entire nation forward with a hope that we will be better for those whom we serve. Truths are now being spoken about the prevalent and persistent racism in our justice system and broader civil society. And there is much pain still in our country. And our country remains plagued by deep-seated racism. So we cannot go back to what was normal ever again. We must hear the voices of Black Lives Matter and the demand on the streets for racial equity. It is so important to identify systemic inequities, not only by police and government and in civil society, but also closer to home, right within our profession. At the ABA, we are working across a multitude of fronts to intensify our racial equity efforts. We are advancing specific policies on police accountability for consideration by our upcoming House of Delegates in early August. And we launched a racial equity in the justice system website last month that brings together the many resources we have for members, for the legal profession, and the public on a range of issues addressing bias and racism and prejudice in the justice system and society. There is an undeniable reality that despite some progress and a hopeful future, for many Black people, equity has not been realized, and human dignity compels all of us to speak against wrongs that we see and hear, but also to act to right unjust laws, practices, and their effects. So with the individual commitment of each attendee who has joined us today, and with a fierce spirit for racial equity and justice at the helm of our future, I am confident that discussions like the one ahead, which this exceptional panel and participating audience will have with us today to address the challenges, will put us on a path to truth that is essential for racial equity. Thank you all for joining us for this path, on this path to justice, and for doing your part to make a difference. Thank you.
Thank you, Judy.
Thank you, President Perry Martinez. Judy, I want to commend you for your outstanding leadership, and thank you for setting the tone at the top with respect to steering the ABA toward the promotion and the implementation of racial equity and social justices and righting those wrongs and using our platforms. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We're honored to be with you all today for this incredibly important time. And we're happy that you all have tuned in. Together, Michael and I chair the ABA YLD Men of Color Project. Now, statistically, men of color, as we know, are overrepresented in our criminal justice system, disproportionately impacted by over-policing and police brutality, and underrepresented in the professional world. To dismantle these disparities, the ABA YLD Men of Color Project, or MOCP for short, we equip young men with tools for success and encourage community service and civic engagement. And now, just our second year, MOCP serves to be a critical piece for today's conversation. The murders of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and countless others have once again reminded us of the realities of police brutality, racial inequity, and systemic racism, realities that communities of color face daily. Today, we acknowledge these tragedies, acknowledge the pain we feel, and seek to discuss how we can take a collective step forward.
Today's conversation is critical for our future. For some, racial inequality and police brutality are existing conversations which have been amplified by current events. And for others, the recent events have illuminated the need for an honest dialogue. Regardless of when you join the conversation, we are so glad that you are here. Today serves as a call to action for young lawyers across the country. No matter your background, we ask that you channel your emotions, frustrations, your hopes, and your talents into this movement. You know, this program will be a candid conversation, and we don't plan on holding back because growth requires discomfort. And while today's conversation may be difficult, it's absolutely necessary and critical. We cannot afford to sit on the sidelines. We must engage for the sake of our profession, our communities, ourselves, and our future.
So leading today's candid conversation are our outstanding guests, Mr. Robert Gray Jr. and Ms. Lanita Baker. Robert Gray Jr. serves as the president of the Leadership Council on Legal Diversity, or LCLD for short. Founded in 2009, LCLD is an organization made up of more than 320 corporate chief legal officers and law firm managing partners, working together to build a more open and diverse legal profession. In 1998, Robert Gray was elected to the chair of the ABA House of Delegates, and in that role, he was the first person of color to serve as an association officer. And in 2004, Robert served as president of the American Bar Association, being just the second African-American to serve in that role.
Lanita Baker serves as an attorney at the Sam Aguiar firm in Louisville, Kentucky. Recently, Ms. Baker received national notoriety due to her vigorous representation of the family of Breonna Taylor, who was murdered in her home by the Louisville Metro Police Department in March of 2020. Ms. Baker also serves as vice president of regions and affiliates for the National Bar Association. Robert Gray and Lanita Baker have each used their careers as a platform to seek equity for all, to enrich the profession and to pave way for young lawyers. Robert and Lanita, welcome. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, team, let's dive right in. We're gonna get right to it. Now, what we love about this conversation and having you all together is that you each bring very different professional perspectives to this conversation. And I want to start with how those perspectives have influenced you. Lanita, starting with you, you've been, as we know, thrust into the national spotlight for your representation of Breonna Taylor's family. Can you talk to us a little bit about that experience?
Yes, Breonna Taylor, that case did thrust me into the national spotlight here beginning in May. Breonna's case was not the first civil rights case that I've had, but for the most part, you know, here my cases remained here in Louisville. The first one was with Tayon Lee, a young man who was pulled out of his car, part of racial profiling, handcuffed and searched. And also, I represented an individual who was attacked by correction guards at Louisville Metro Department of Corrections. But you're right, it is Breonna Taylor's case, who was tragically taken from her family in March of this year.
She is one of three. You know, there was that trifecta right there with Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and then followed by George Floyd. And I think that the fact that there were three, the fact that we're in the midst of COVID-19 on lockdown, there's nothing much really going on. I think that played a huge role in, you know, Breonna's case getting the media attention that it definitely deserves. But
Yeah, and Lanita, I want to talk to you about how the case fits in national dialogue. Before that, though, you shared a little bit about your experience having taken civil rights cases before, and maybe this is the answer to that question, but anybody can find themselves in the type of situation. Nobody knows when a quote unquote high profile case might be coming. But what prepares you for this moment, if anything? Was it those other cases? Was it other experiences, especially as any lawyer, maybe even a young lawyer, right, that can be thrust in that same thing?
so I have had my career spans. I started out my legal career as a public defender. I then actually switched sides and became a prosecutor. So both of those roles played significantly in my ability to navigate the civil rights case, especially as it relates to policing. I then, with the city attorney's office, I left the criminal side of their office and went to the civil side, and I worked with the legislative legislative services division, drafting ordinances for the city. So as many of you all know, one of the first things that happened with Breonna Taylor's case is that Metro Council drafted Breonna's law, which banned no-knock warrants in the city of Louisville. My experience working in that division let me know that, hey, well, you know, we might not be able to go to Frankfurt until January when the General Assembly meets, but Metro Council's meeting right now. Let's go get something done on the local level now. So those experiences definitely help prepare me for everything that's coming with Breonna Taylor. I will also say it's been the relationships I've built specifically within the National Bar Association. Benjamin Crump is my co-counsel there. He's a past president of the National Bar Association. The ABA and the National Bar Association share a handful of leaders now, you know, with Dennis Archer, Paulette Brown, Reggie Turner coming up, that were all past presidents of the National Bar Association as well. So, yeah. So,
Lanita, you mentioned something interesting too, prosecutorial experience and background. How have you leveraged that, parlayed that? Is that giving you a different perspective? Especially, I assume, correct me if I'm wrong, when you were a prosecutor, those no-knock warrants were in existence, right? So there were cases that you maybe were advancing or not so much.
No-knock warrants are very rare. And when you look at the history of them, they're very dangerous. And that's why they're no-knock warrants. And I would be one, even if I was still a prosecutor, I would argue that they have no business in policing because they're too dangerous for civilians and too dangerous for law enforcement. So it is important for you to know I'm not anti-police in any. I was a prosecutor for 7 years. I have a lot of friends that are police officers, but I am. We have to right the system. You know, I prosecuted with a vision of what can I offer this individual so that they don't recidivate. What do they need from me so that I don't see them back before me? And so that's one of the things as we talk about as we go through this conversation. One of those calls of actions are to prosecutors, because prosecutors play a huge role in eliminating police misconduct.
Yeah, I mean, it's critical you have compassionate prosecutors, right, that are on that side of the table as well. One last thing on this topic, and that is, and how do you think that the tragedy of Breonna's death fits into the national conversation, national dialogue? You mentioned the timing, so this trifecta we felt it's not new that there have been people killed at the hands of police, or maybe something appears so obvious that it was a murder. But how does her death in particular and the tragedy surrounding those circumstances fit into that national dialogue?
I think it added that element of the no-knock warrants and the dangerousness of those. I think it highlights the dilemmas when we don't have body camera footage available, and why is it that we are so quick to follow the narrative of what the police put out initially, you know, and with the documents that we've seen since the initial, when they first reported Breonna's death, it was police executing a search warrant, suspect dead, other suspect in custody. It was as cut and dry as that, with no additional information on exactly what happened. And you know, they charged her boyfriend with attempted murder. And so it's that narrative of when we don't have body camera, or at least when they're not producing body camera, because there's still some question of, do we have body camera in this case? And that's something that we're fighting for. But I'm a proponent of all officers, unless you're severely undercover, all officers should always have body camera on, and they should always be activated. And if they don't have it on and they don't have it activated, then there should be significant consequences for not having that body camera. It's too important. We've seen that just the discussion overall with being able to see what happened to George Floyd, right? Body camera tells us everything.
That's right. And we're going to get in that later about what we can see. So that's a great point. Great point for sure.
Thank you for that, Lanita. So Robert, as the second person of color to serve as president of the ABA from 2004 to 2005, you hold a unique place in the association's history. Can you talk about where your focus is, your focus and your energy is now? And can you also discuss the role the Leadership Council on Legal Diversity is playing in the legal profession?
Yes, first of all, let me congratulate the two of you for agreeing to moderate the two of us in this program. Lanita, thank you for letting me join you. I am privileged to be with you. The Men of Color Project, I think, is an important tool for us to navigate what are some very challenging times right now, and to make sure that we keep each other informed, educated, and aware of what we can do to influence change in this country in a positive way. So I congratulate you, and I'm very proud of you. The Leadership Council on Legal Diversity, as Jerome said, is an organization, but was formed in 2009 to take a more aggressive, thoughtful, and proactive approach to building a legal profession that is as diverse as the country it serves. So that's the premise. One of its leaders is Rick Palmore, who was the person who initiated this interesting and so far fairly successful organization. Rick Palmore, an African-American lawyer, once general counsel at Sara Lee and at General Mills, issued a call to action to his colleagues before this organization was formed to say, we can do better. We should do better. And at the end of the day, we have to do better in terms of integrating the profession. And that was received well by the general counsel community. Over 150 general counsels signed on to the letter, and some progress was made. But Rick was not satisfied with that, felt that the time was right to revisit the issue and to bring more focus on it. And he chose to bring together not only this time general counsel, but managing partners. And as we know the profession, things get done when you have all hands on deck. If general counsel are the only ones there, then managing partners feel left out. And if it's just managing partners, they say, what's the motivation if the general counsel aren't here? So we know how that works. And so we brought them together and said collaboratively, we've got to do better. And so a number of programs aimed at talent development were set up. And the difference in these programs that exist in other organizations is that they're based on the premise that the legal profession is based on relationships and the expansion and the development of a network. And so the Fellows Program, which is the flagship program, for example, is made up of lawyers both in-house and outside, equally balanced, men and women, equally balanced, who are engaged in a discussion about their careers and the ways in which they can develop, not just as lawyers, because at the end of the day, their organizations are really focused on that, but what can they do as leaders? And that's what we're focused on. And the idea is that we want to help develop the next generation of leaders, not just for the profession, but for the country. So the fellows spend a year together. And as we know, based on our relationship with other organizations, if we get a good weekend with somebody, we're doing good, because we got day jobs. But we figured out how to keep people engaged for a year. And I'll give you two examples. They have 3 in-person meetings. The class size is close to 300. So you're building relationships with a lot of people. But we do something that's awfully unique, and that is we have learning experiences, which is a visitation to a corporate campus invited by the general counsel, who spends the day with a group of 25 to 35 fellows, giving them a deep immersion into what that lawyer does to represent their client, the corporation. They meet with direct reports. They meet with C-suite colleagues. Usually the CEO comes in and meets with the fellows. They meet with outside counsel to understand the expectation. And they meet with the management team that the general counsel supports to better understand the corporation's position within the industry that they are focused. That's invaluable. And we set up 7 to 8 of those a year. And so fellows have a very unique experience in being exposed to leaders with each other. And the in-house counsel and the law firm lawyers learn as much from each other as they do from those experiences. So Brad Smith, who is now the president of Microsoft, was then general counsel and the chair of the board of LCLD, said in 2011, by the time we finish our 10th year, we should have touched the lives of 10,000 law students and lawyers. That should be our mission. That should be our goal. And at the 10-year mark, we celebrated the fact that we had actually done that. What does that say? If we decide we want to do something, we can do it. If we decide that as a collective group of lawyers in this country that we want to manage the effort, promote the importance, and set the goals for a more diverse and inclusive profession, we have the power, if we have the will, to make that happen. So that's what I've been doing in my spare time.
Wow. That's amazing. That's amazing, Robert. So the focus today is on a call to action, right? Mobilizing and empowering a generation of lawyers. How would you say the Leadership Council on Diversity, Legal Diversity, is propelling that conversation forward?
Well, you know, at the end of the day, it's an individual effort, and it's about leadership. If the general counsel and managing partners want to make a difference, they have to make a personal commitment to make that change. Take that to their management committee, take that to the CEO, take that to those who have the power to make a difference in the organization. That personal commitment establishes a priority, that diversity and inclusion is not just an addendum to the work of the organization, that it is an essential element of what the corporation stands for or the firm is about. If that's true, then it becomes incorporated in the strategic plan. And the strategic plan is where action occurs. Everybody pays attention to the strategic plan because at the end of the day, you get measured against what you do for the strategic plan and the effort of the organization to accomplish its goals. And the final thing I will say is if we're really serious about this, what gets measured gets done. And so if compensation is tied to results, we get an awful lot done that we didn't think we could do.
Robert, let me ask you this. So the association was founded in 1878, right? It took about 125 years for the first person of color to be elected president. You then served in the role immediately after. Paulette Brown in 2015 became the first woman of color to serve in the same role. And in 2021, Reginald Turner will be the fourth person of color to take on the presidency. So to you, what do these milestones represent?
It's the maturing of the profession. It's the evolution of our society. It's the appreciation that we all bring something of value to the table. And you can't appreciate that, or you can't actualize that unless you give people a chance. I have always said, just open the door, and minority lawyers, lawyers of color, African-American lawyers, will not only demonstrate their value, they will bring a higher value to the discussion and the solution that you're seeking. I know that. I've had that experience. I know that we are creative. I know that we are resilient. I know that we are persistent. And I know that we understand what it means to take something to the finish line when obstacles are in front of you. You give somebody with that kind of emotional energy and intellectual capability a problem, and they will flat get it done. And that's what we bring to the table. And that's what is happening as a reflection of our participation in the ABA. We are now leading the association.
Robert, I want to follow up on something you just said, about opening the door, right? And about this evolution of society where, frankly, attorneys of color can't always open the door for themselves, right? And so you need allies. So moving the concept of allyship, especially with the conversation around the civil unrest, hearing you talk about those relationships within the association and outside of it through LCLD, you mentioned the importance of relationships. But for allyship, a critical mass is really important. And this includes, of course, the help of allies or white communities, those that maybe are not the impacted groups. Your career having been built around forging these relationships and pursuing common goals, even with your spare time work now, I'm interested on your thoughts and experiences with allyship, and in particular, how can allies actually help support the pursuit for racial equity?
That's actually, if you think about it, if that's not a part of the equation, it doesn't work. We can't do this by ourselves, nor can they.
Right.
It is going to require a concerted and joint effort on all of our parts. But I will tell you this. My career started really on my own. I wasn't offered a job at a majority law firm. I started my own. And Juanita will appreciate this. I had a second job. I taught school. I taught the local university to support myself so that the money I brought in from the firm, I could pay for a legal assistant. I know what it means to do it on your own. I know how it feels. I know how it works. I was public defender. I was legal aid lawyer. I did pro bono cases. I was a community leader. I was president of the Crusade for Voters, which is the oldest African-American organization in the city. I know what it takes. So when somebody says to me, are you capable? It's almost an insult, because I couldn't be where I am to have this discussion unless I had done twice as much as you had. So allyship is a recognition and must be one of education about the role that they have to play, and don't assume that I don't know what I'm doing. Don't assume that I can't get it on the first hop. Don't assume that it's going to take me longer to understand the problem than somebody else. And so that opportunity and that allyship has to be born out of mutual respect. If we start there, we go a long way. And the second part of that is this. I shouldn't have to solve all the problems of African-American attorneys. But I do need help if I'm going to participate. And so the opportunity is to say, let's work together, not just to see what I can do. I know what I can do. But let's work together and see if we can collectively take on the challenges that we face. You've got to own your career. Nobody else can do it. And so I made it a point, Jerome, every day to speak to everybody that I encountered, wherever I was and whatever I do. Whether I'm in the elevator, whether I'm walking down the street, whether I'm in my organization, I'm going to speak to you, whether you speak to me or not. But it's going to be on you, not on me.
Yeah. That's back to collective mindset. Without relationship, you can't move as a unit. You have to sort of know each other and appreciate the common ground.
You know, it's interesting. I think we recognize that public allyship is important and certainly helps to spur change. But Lenita, can you talk about the concept of performative allyship and discuss how it's harmful, how we spot it, and ways to educate and empower allies to avoid some of the common traps of performative allyship?
Yeah, so performative allyship is when you might speak on the systemic issues. You might make a post about it. You might have a training on diversity and inclusion. But as to what Robert said, what are you actually doing? And what steps are you taking to bring about change? And one thing I want people to always be mindful of is, you know, you see us, you listen to us, but are you really hearing us and hearing what we're saying? And I think that's important as we talk about taking action or our allies taking action, listening and actually hearing what we're saying and how to make changes. And Robert said a lot, you know, it's the opening up the doors. We can't open those doors ourselves. You know, I like Robert was, you know, the first 10 to 12 years of my legal career, I was working a second job as well because you have to do it, right?
Yeah.
And we talk about diversity and inclusion, but are we really being inclusive? What steps are, and not just our law firms, but our corporations, what steps are we really doing? Are you really trying to diversify your employment pool if, you know, you have a position for a corporate lawyer and you want someone with 15 years experience when, you know, traditionally African-American attorneys haven't been given those corporate associate positions. So you want someone with these transactional experiences, but where are they getting the experience? Exactly. So that's part of the issue and what we really have to tackle. And as Robert said, you give an African-American or any attorney of color a chance, we're gonna blow it out of the water because that's what we've been trained to do our whole lives. So you have to give us opportunities and you can't just go off of experience. Same with companies. You can't say you're hiring for executives, you want an executive with 20 years experience and also claim that you're looking for diverse. What happens is you get this small pool of either attorneys or executives that everyone's pulling the same. So you see them making, you know, doing the rotation from this company to this company because that's the pool with the experience and you're not really opening the pool any further.
Yeah, it's acknowledged that there are inherent issues that are going to prevent people from walking in with the experiences or, you know, what the pool should look like. You know, I mean, you hear a lot of times, you know, what we're trying to find, we just can't find good Black applicants, right? And what does that mean? What does that mean? You
got to be more creative, yeah.
Exactly.
Time to be more creative.
Exactly.
When we have other experiences. I may not have traditional transactional experience, but I can tell you just on Breonna Taylor cases, how many, you know, releases and use of image contracts that I've read. But I'm a trial attorney, but I've been looking at them and I've been crossing out and I think people are shocked when I cross out, but I'm like, yeah, you know, but so we can do it. Being a lawyer it's the skill set. It's just applying a different subject matter, right?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. We're going to transition to a new topic before, so I just want a quick reminder for those tuning in on viewing on Zoom. You can ask a question using the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, maybe at the top if you're tuning in on a tablet, and you can ask questions of the panelists. Some of them are already starting to flow in. For those being on Facebook, feel free to comment with your questions, and our team's going to be monitoring those. We'll have a Q&A portion towards the end of the program, and we hope to address many of those questions. Let's go to the state of affairs, the state of the nation, where we are today. If we take a step back, and this is for either of you that want to dive in, if we take a step back and get a global view here, a holistic 50,000-foot view, as you see it, where is America today with regard to racial equity? And if you compare it with, are you hopeful for the future?
Go ahead, Lonnie.
We've been here for a while. It's just magnified right now. I think magnified in terms of police relations, and it's so much more than just police relations, but in terms of police relations, it's from the camera phones to body cameras. We're just now able to see what Black people have been saying has been going on for years. We're just not able to see it large scale. And once you see it, you can't really ignore it. It's hard for people to ignore it. And if you do ignore it, then you have to start challenging yourself and your beliefs. And are you a part of the problem, or are you going to be a part of the solution? So I think that's where we are. I am hopeful for the future. I'm very hopeful for the future just in what I've seen. Of course, and we talk about social media, but I look at here in Louisville, Kentucky, our primary election was June 23rd. We had the highest turnout ever in a primary election. Wow. So that's what makes me hopeful. It's not necessarily seeing stuff on social media, because if they're not actually, if there's not works going out to social media, then it's all for nothing. But you know, when you hear in a primary election, we had the highest turnout ever, you have to be hopeful.
Yeah. Social media is the new barbershop and hair salon a lot of times, right? It's a way to just air out our feelings and our emotions, but there's no action, right? But right. People spend their whole time just like you do in the barbershop and nothing changes. So it's important, like you say, like, okay, how do you take that and that activity and energy and turn it to action, and voting is a key way. Robert, anything you want to add on that?
Yeah, I like that. I like that new barbershop hair salon.
Yeah.
A couple of things that come to mind. The first is, you know, I was a teenager during the Martin Luther King civil rights era. So I got to see it, I got to feel it, I got to participate in it, but at a very young age. And I never thought we'd have to do that again. It's just, are you kidding me? You know, kind of thing. The difference, which is noticeable and remarkable, is that if you look at the protests in the 60s, they were all Black. They were the white police officers and the dogs and the fire hoses turned on Black people. 99% of them were. And here, this is a cross section of America saying we don't like this stuff. We're upset with this. As a matter of fact, that could have been me down there, not just an African American, or not only an African American. So I think it's different in that it has created, you want to call it allyship, it has created a different feeling of what it means to be an American as opposed to what it means just to be a Black American. And people are more empathetic, they're more appreciative, and they're more responsive. And I think that politicians in a negative way have caused us to go backwards in the civil rights efforts that we've had before. The public didn't do it. Politicians generated an approach that furthered their interests by dividing us and making some of us the enemy of the state. And that enemy of the state resulted in our arrests. It resulted in an industry of prisons. It resulted in menial jobs and an inability to rise above that which the challenges we were faced with. Now is a new opportunity, but that opportunity has to be rooted in a cultural adjustment. There has to be a different view of what it means to be part and confronted with the criminal justice system. Courts have to change. Police culture has to change. Politicians that don't understand that have to be voted out of office. And we have to start building a leadership base that is more reflective of the protests that we've seen, as opposed to those who are anti-protest. And it's going to be a challenge, but it's the challenge of our lifetime. And we cannot shy away from it. We have to engage it, embrace it, and get knee deep in it if we're going to see anything that results in a better America. I will tell you one thing. I grew up as a person when I was appointed chairman of the Alcohol Beverage Control Commission of the state of Virginia by Chuck Robb, who was then governor, and my candidacy was advanced by a guy who was then senator named Doug Wilder, who later became the first African-American governor elected in the country. I was in charge of 160 law enforcement, state police, licensed special agents. And I was their boss. And they had not only had they never had anybody as young as I was at 31, but they had definitely not had African Americans, talking to them. But I had a certain amount of criminal law under my belt by that time, and criminal defense work. And so I took over the police force. And I found the culture to be unresponsive to the work that needed to be done. And instead of letting the two groups have their day, I told them they were going to be merged into one group and we were going to start over again. And there were 160 special agents, 3 of whom were Black. And we did it. We did it, and I said, you know what? Instead of trying to figure out how many people you can arrest, how many people you can find, how many people you can seek, understand these people pay your salary. These folks that run restaurants, these folks that run hotels, these folks that sell alcoholic beverages, if they don't sell it, you don't get paid. So you're gonna put them out of business? Is that what you're telling me? I'm sorry, Tell me again how this works. And we have to have those conversations that say the public is who we're serving. It's not our own interest, and it's not the interest of politicians.
Robert, when you talk about the protests happening today, I think you're right that this particular moment feels different, right? And you compared this moment to the Martin Luther King era. But how would you say this moment in particular is different from the civil unrest and protests that occurred back in 2014 when Michael Brown was fatally shot in Ferguson and there was a lot of energy and momentum in the Black Lives Matter movement?
Even Trayvon Martin, right, Mike?
Right.
Yeah. I mean, unfortunately, the list goes on and on. But you talk about the new barbershop and hair salon. That had a lot to do with it because it became up close and personal, live and in color, what was happening, as opposed to a report through the eyes of a reporter 3 days later. When it happens in front of you, it is just breathtaking and it is shocking. And it is, that could be me without any question. But just the inhumaneness of these actions that we are seeing is shocking the conscience of America. And the protest is a reflection of that you didn't see in the civil rights era of the 60s, because it wasn't when it did get on TV, it shocked America, but it took a long time for that to happen. And this is immediate. And so it has created an immediate response. And that response, and it'd be different if it just was one event, but it becomes a series of events month after month, week after week. And you're saying, doesn't anybody get this? Does anybody understand that we have got to change the culture of what it means to live in a democracy that has a criminal justice system that fairly treats its citizens? And I will say this: you get to hit the reset button every so often, every so many generations. We are given that opportunity. Somebody upstairs has said, I'm gonna give you all a chance to hit the reset button. I'm gonna see what you're gonna do about it. And I think it is now up to us to say, we have got to review, re-examine, and refresh and reform what this country stands for and how it goes about executing on the ideals that it says it stands for.
And I think we're, just to add to that, it's been slowly building to the culmination that we're at now. But we also have to recognize, when we look at, until Botham Jean, was there anyone held accountable for the actions? And I think that's what we really have to be intentional about. Yes, everyone knows, Lanita Baker, Sam Aguirre, being front, we represent Breonna Taylor's family in a civil suit. We can't prosecute them criminally, but we've been continuously pushing for them to be prosecuted criminally. But not only are we pushing for them to be prosecuted and terminated, we're pushing for legislative changes. And I've been very intentional about using my platform, or whenever I'm talking, to talk about the importance of exactly what Robert talked about, of voting, of knowing who your elected leaders are on the local and state level, your judges, your prosecutors, the importance of these elections, and these examples of why those elections are so important. And I think us as attorneys, we know this process. We know that we elect prosecutors. We know that, at least in most jurisdictions, we're going to elect those judges. It's our obligation to let people know what judges need to be elected out. And we got to make sure we know what judges are truly upholding and treating all defendants fairly, or all litigants fairly, right? So we have that inside information. We got to let people know. So it's the elections, it's changing the people, and Robert talked about it. I made a post yesterday and saying, there's 3 things we got to do. It's legislative change, political change, and community change, and that's what has to happen. And as attorneys, we got to be a part of that discussion. We can't rely on, activists to do it. We have to be a part of the conversation.
Yeah, that's I think a big takeaway and a purpose of today that you both have been able to illuminate for us. And we talk about the call to action, what this program is named, and I can't wait to get you guys' insights there, especially thinking about being young lower communities, the future of the profession, right? The interpretation, the adjudication, the creation and reform of legal regimes. But we got to look past and get an idea of where we're going, right? And look into the past. So we think about, how do we get here? The assessment you all shared of where we are as a country today. We've talked about how this era might feel a little bit different from, quote unquote, recent events in civil unrest, to Robert, you sharing, your sentiments about during the MLK and civil rights era. Naturally think about what are the contributing factors of how we got here. But I think the better question might be, has racial inequity always been present in America? Some people say racism is American and is American pie, right? They say it's a part of us, a part of our ingrained, maybe not the ideals that were drafted, but when something says all men are created equal except Black men, right? That was never the goal, right? And all men would not win it, right? So we're inequities already inherent. And so have we always been near or at this boiling point? So, what are your thoughts on it always being present and now we're just seeing it flow out?
I think it's definitely always been present. It's a matter of how honest, and I've had a lot of these conversations. I will say, in working in government sectors, I've been that quiet person, and as a young lawyer, afraid like, oh, I was already working 2 jobs, Robert, so I didn't want to get fired from my main breadwinning job, right? So you do get in those positions, and I'm here, and it's really kind of liberating because you really get to do a self-evaluation. It's an emotional roller coaster, but you really get to do that self-evaluation of, how have I been complicit into where we are now? And it's me being quiet and me not calling, we talk about it later, macroaggressions out when I know that that's what they are. Me not being, and you don't have to be confrontational. I won't say that. I was going to say I'm not a confrontational person. I can be when needed, but I try not to be. But or is it, you always want to? How often have we said we want to be that person that's liked, or we don't want to seem, especially me, being a woman, I don't want to be seen like the angry Black woman, So, and I've always tried to tailor myself so that I don't come off as that. But then, to what point are you suppressing information that other people, our allies, really need to hear? So I was on a call with a group of Black attorneys in our state last week because we were talking, our State Bar Association put out a magazine devoted to women attorneys, and they only had one African-American woman on there, and it was the Court of Appeals Judge, Denise Clayton, but didn't reference any other Black attorneys or judges within the state of Kentucky. And it's just like, wow, we go in and out, and we talk, we've come to use these terms, unconscious bias, implicit bias, or, implicit and unconscious bias. Is it truly implicit at this point? Is it truly unconscious, or do you know, but we're not forcing people to actually change? Right. So that's where I'm at now. I won't go too deep because I got, it hit me, and then I'm like, I got to do some more research on really, is this implicit and unconscious, or are we just giving it this euphemism when people really know what they do, what they are doing?
A term I've heard, Robert, I want to get your thoughts, is that I've heard overt racism versus covert racism. So just because it's covert or undercover doesn't mean it's implicit. It just means that, okay, we're not burning the cross on your front lawn. Okay, fair. But now we've just institutionalized things, but doesn't mean we had no idea that these rubrics and these measuring points and the milestones we used to assess you were inherently racist. It's implicit. No, so that's a great point.
I want to, Juanita brought out a very interesting point that I think needs further development, but I've got 2 thoughts in my mind. And the first is the issue of implicit, covert, all that. The other is, I think, more important to this audience, to continue to expand on what Juanita said, and that is, you have to find your voice. You have to know when to speak up. If you speak too soon without knowing what you're talking about, nobody will listen. And if you speak too late and you've done all the research, nobody cares. And so you have to find your voice, and you have to know when to use it and how to use it. You don't always have to be confrontational. As a matter of fact, if you try to beat everybody over the head with a 2x4, you're not going to get anywhere. And eventually they're going to figure that out. So like, here he comes again, close the door. So you got to be smart. You got to have more than one way to approach a problem. You've got to elicit the help of allies when that's appropriate. You have to form coalitions when that's advantageous. And sometimes, guess what? You have to go alone. But you got to know what to do, when to do it, and how to do it. And that takes you to the next point that Juanita talked about, and that's self-awareness. You got to know who you are. You got to know why you're doing what you're doing. You've got to understand what your impact in a conversation is going to be. You've got to know which words to use at this particular moment and how to use them. Is it covert? Is it implicit? Is it explicit? Is it this, that, or whatever it is? You got to figure that out. And those words are choice words. And for lawyers, they're terms of art in terms of how we communicate and what we say and how we say it. The second thing is this on the side of implicit, and God knows we've got 100 names for this stuff, but here's what I'm seeing. And I feel privileged and a little bit in the catbird seat, because I get to talk with general counsel and managing partners from all over the country, from every industry that makes a difference in this country. They're Black, they're white, they're Asian, they're Hispanic, they're gay, they're not, they're men, they're women. Here's what I'm learning, and this is why I'm hopeful, is that there's a new generation of those folks taking over right now. And they're ready to do something different than their predecessor. And they want to be careful because for a lot of them, this is the first time they've had that kind of job. So they're being careful and cautious, but they're not being resistant to the idea that something has to change. They just want to know how to do it. They don't, if there is a bear trap out there, can you tell me where that is so I don't go step in it right away? And we should have those conversations, and people have to help each other, but make no mistake about it, there's a different generation of leaders that is emerging in this country, that's emerging in corporate America, that's clearly emerging in the legal side of America. And but we also recognize that the longer you stay in a position that you don't do anything, the less you do later on. So we've got to take advantage of this moment. We've got to institute changes that will sustain itself, because as soon as my career is over, you don't want to have to start over again. So we've got to create more, it's systemic, but it has to be sustainable. And it's got to be put in place, not based on the person, but on the organization's values, on the principles upon which the organization is built. And that's why you're seeing a lot of companies having a hard time trying to figure this out, because it's not based on values. It's not based on principle. It's based on the dollar. And when it's based on the dollar, people see through that and they go, okay, so we got to talk this way. And so the Redskins said, okay, no more money, let's think about the name. It is, you got to get people's attention any way you can, but then you have to take that moment and make it a teaching moment and make the systemic change sustainable.
Robert, I think you're totally right about the importance of seizing the moment right now. And I want to shift gears to talking about the demographic that makes up our audience today, the young lawyer. I'm curious how you see this group fitting into the conversation. Lenita, let me ask you this. You are a young lawyer, right? You're in the trenches right now. What do you think your larger role in this movement entails?
Who did you say was
one of the things I definitely want to do is get more young lawyers involved. Like, I understand not everyone is a civil rights lawyer. I'm personal injury lawyer that takes civil rights cases. I've been a criminal. So not everyone's going to take those civil rights cases, but you don't have to. But you find your role, and your role may not be protesting. It may not be to be a legal observer, but donate to organizations that are out there on the front lines, you know? So I just want more young lawyers to get involved, and that's what I'm gonna end. And it's how can I talk to someone to help them figure out what their role in the movement is? I have no problem doing that. As I said, you know, I'm a religious person, so I think I'm here by, you know, God's plan, because God knows I tried to take a lot of diversions, but, you know, it's here. Public defender, prosecutor, you know, writing ordinances for the city, and then being in this position. the relationships that you know, my co-counsel, all of it's been, that's divine intervention there. So, but everyone has a role, and we really have to figure out what our role is, and what we need that are, and I'm kind of in between. I'm on my way out of being a young lawyer, Shirley, I think, but just how the groups define themselves. But so, you know, I wanted to mentor those who are, you know, I'm at 14 years experience, those behind me, but I'm also wise enough to know, you know, I've enjoyed this panel listening to Robert. You know, I've gotten to have those conversations with Paulette and you know, so, but being able to hear from Robert as well. And I take wise counsel from those who have been in this fight a lot longer. And I look at that generation of lawyers, and the ones who by all accounts are successful, they've been very vocal. They are vocal. I don't know if they were that way their whole careers, but you know, we're not going to get anywhere being afraid. But Robert's correct. You got to be wise. You got to know what you're talking about, and you have to pick your battles. It's not every battle. So, yeah, you know, I'm looking at some of the questions over there. So that's why I said, and I get it's hard speaking out, but once you do, it's liberating. And it may not be speaking out. It may be, you know, donating. It may be, you know, getting involved some other way.
Robert, I need to tease you up. We mentioned wise counsel. So you're a young lawyer at heart. And, but, you know, we know, what are your thoughts on this generation of lawyers? You know, what role can we and should we play in this movement? I'll never forget you sharing at the Men of Color Summit last year that, you know, it's our time, right? And to inspire to say it's our time of action. And so what are your thoughts as you engage in pipeline and give back?
I follow the Baker principle, man. It's like you got to find your place, and it may not be, you know, on the front line of a protest. It could be in the back room of a lawsuit. It could be raising money for the most important charitable effort that's going on. It could be mentoring young people in school to understand their history and their place and their role in society. If I found the greatest gratification when I went into public schools and taught. I went to a high school in East LA one time, primarily Hispanic students. And the teacher introduced me to the group, and they kind of took one look at me and they were like, yeah, okay. And I said, you all know my name, but I don't know yours. And so I went to each desk and I put out my hand and said, my name is Robert Gray, what's yours? That personal attention and the respect to show to somebody is something we can impart and give to people that they'll remember the rest of their life. So then I said, okay, now that we know each other, tell me what you want to be when you grow up. And so I got, well, you know, and it's every famous athlete, every famous entertainer, every got named. I'm going to be that and I'm going to be this. And I said, you know, I've gone around the room. I let everybody speak. I said, I've gone around the room. I didn't hear anybody say they wanted to be a lawyer. And they kind of looked at each other as like, why would we? Like, what? Lawyers to us represent the problem and somebody that's going to hurt us, right, not somebody that's going to help us. Why? Because most of them are unrepresented when they have to deal with the justice system. Most of them are court appointed if they have to deal with the justice system. And to a lawyer, they didn't choose, somebody chose for them. They may or may not be interested in their case. And so I said to them, and this is where I think we play an important role in developing the next generation. I said, let me tell you something. All those things that y'all identified that y'all want to be, superstars, super entertainers, super athletes, You know what all of y'all have in common? Y'all are all gonna need a lawyer. Every one of y'all. If you're gonna be who you say you're gonna be, you're gonna need, and you might need more than one.
Right.
And then I explained to them what lawyers do. When I finished, I said, listen, it's been great meeting you. I very much enjoyed being with you. I just want to ask one question as I'm walking out the door. How many of y'all would consider being a lawyer?
The hands shoot up in the room.
That's what we have to do. And that doesn't take any special requirement of whether you want to be on the front line or back line, in front of the house or back of the house, giving money and not giving money. You can give your time.
Yeah.
You can be a role model. And it's at this stage in your career that you can have the most impact. And so get engaged, be part of the community, change the way people think about their future, and you will make a difference.
And I'll add one thing just because, and I did, I talked about wise counsel and I do seek advice. And I'll say just even preparing for this fireside chat today, I appreciate you, Robert, when we were on our planning session last week and I said, I want to say something about this. And you talked about it something and you kind of, you challenged me a bit. And I was like, okay, maybe I'm not ready to talk about that yet. So I say that to young lawyers to know that when we seek counsel, we really have to listen and not take it as an attack, but take it and realize, and it's to what you said today, it's not, I will be ready to talk on that, but I wasn't ready to talk about it. And I just had something, I read something, I'm like, And so it's when we get that advice, we really have to take it and heed it. I mean, you can disregard it if you want to, but to be effective, if people have been there and done that, you really do have to think about they are where they are for a reason. So,
So we want to talk a lot about what young lawyers can do and to get them mobilized, but naturally there's a lot of energy, right? There's a lot of energy and emotion. And Mike, we spent some time talking about this too, about that range of emotions, right? Like what are people feeling, Mike, when we talk to people? Sorry, Mike, I'm cutting out, but I'm saying so people are feeling discouraged, right? They're feeling marginalized, they're feeling isolated, right? And especially individuals of color, communities of color. And one thing you all touched on, the first touch point that many communities of color have with the legal profession, right, is a negative one. They see lawyers as an extension of law enforcement. But when we think about our audience today, who's feeling a range of things, as individuals of color, do any of those feelings resonate with you? And in what ways? And why or why not?
Go ahead, Lanita.
I mean, they have to resonate with us because, we may be lawyers, but we have family members that are not lawyers. We have friends who, we've grown up with that aren't lawyers and still may be, involved in some portion or been affected, negatively impacted by the criminal justice system. So to me, you can't be, a Black person and not be impacted by it and not feel some sense of obligation to want to change it, and I mean, our profession is not who we can go out on the street and dressed in t-shirt and jeans and they don't know that we're a lawyer and we're just another Black person. Like that's what we are. So of course we feel it. Listen,
I live on a street that I moved on the street in 1995 in the downtown Richmond. It's a small 3-block, kind of almost cul-de-sac. And I was the first person of color to live on the street. One other family has moved in since 1995, and that was last year. But for the period of time from the time I moved there until today, I was the only person of color on the block. I parked my car not too long ago at the end of a side street, and a police car, and my car was the last one till you get to the next street, and there was a police car parked sideways across my car. I could get out, but I couldn't back out. And two police officers were sitting there. This is COVID. So I've got on a mask and I've got on my sweat clothes. And I'm walking toward them, but I'm really walking toward my car. And as I got closer, I could see them talking to each other. And as I got even closer, they took the camera that was on the sun visor and they put it on the dashboard as I got closer to them. It's like, we don't know what he's going to do, but we're going to make sure we capture it. and so when you ask the question, you know, how do you feel? I feel it, and you feel it, and we feel it every freaking day. It won't go away. It won't go away until we figure out that every person is created equal. Every person deserves a fair and honest opportunity to be who they are and not be some stereotype that is a part of a political or ideological agenda of some group. Until we respect each other as human beings, we're not going to go it much farther than we are. Yeah. And that means you got to be vulnerable to some extent. You can't protect everybody every day in every way, but you can sure speak to somebody every day. You can sure help a younger person realize that they have potential every day. You can show kindness every day. And you can be part of solutions in every way. And if you do your part, you're going to instill that interest, that vitality in somebody else. And they'll do something positive that day. You don't have to be the first car out of the parking lot. Let somebody else go first.
There you go. Yeah.
You know, because I'm going to tell you, and this is my grandmother talking now, she raised me. And said, what goes around comes around. You know? And that's the truth. You may not get it today, but you'll get it tomorrow, whether it's a good thing or a bad thing that you did.
That's right.
But you're going to get it back one way or the other.
Yeah.
Give as much as you can give. Be as loving as you possibly can be. Share yourself and be vulnerable to being open about who you are. And at the end of the day, you will change somebody else's attitude. You will change somebody else's belief that we are in this together. We are not in this in a us versus them society.
Yeah. Vulnerability is a key takeaway, what you said, Robert. I mean, in I think living our authentic truth, we can both educate and empower those around us, because there was the viral clip many of you have probably only seen, and we're going to jump into what, you know, where we go from here, kind of future hold, and then jump to our Q&A. You also on point, you've answered a lot of the Q&A questions just on what we covered today, but what I want to definitely touch on is that living your authentic truth, right? And then making sure when you do so, you can open minds and open eyes, right? And you can uplift, because at the end of the day is this clip that went viral with the legislature, when basically he said, when I go to my barbershop, using the barbershop term, and I'm on the corner talking to my guys, they look at me, right? And then the cops came and stopped me and said, I thought you were one of them. He said, I am one of them. And he said that, you know, because in the day when I go to the gym too, and I think about this personally, and Michael and I had this conversation recently, like, what needs to look like a lawyer, right? We're lawyers all the way, fully fledged. But, you know, I walk in with my locks at the gym and wearing, you know, a hoodie and sweats, because that's what you do when you go to the gym, right? I look like, quote unquote, one of them. But does that mean now I got to wear a polo and shorts to the gym because I got to make sure that I don't look like that way? So living our truth authentically, I think that's a key part of this conversation going forward, because a lot of us, we internalize it, we try to hide our truth because we don't want to push up against people's sensitivities, right? So that's a great point. But Mike, I'll kick it to you now.
Yeah, I mean, what you said, Robert, about, it's important that we give as much as we can, and that we all have a responsibility in this movement. I think it's really important. But Lenita, let me ask you this, achieving racial equity and dismantling systemic racism and eliminating police brutality, these are all key goals for this movement, right? But with these key goals in mind, what's next? From your perspective, what is the next step forward?
I mean, the next step forward is for everyone, again, I've said it, to find their place and get involved some way. If you're a young prosecutor, you have to prosecute with your eyes open for police misconduct. I knew when I was a prosecutor, there were certain officers, if they came in front of me and the defendant said something different happened, I knew that I couldn't just take the officer's word. And when you know that, you have an obligation to carry out justice, to do what's right, and that may be dismissed in that case, right? So prosecutors, you have a huge role in this movement. Judges have a huge role. We can't continue to say, that someone put a tape up of one judge here, and the discrepancy in sentencing against the two accidental death cases, but the disparity in sentencing of a Black female and a white female. But the white female on probation sentenced the Black female to 8 years. Both no records, everything else considerable, and it's like, we got to call those judges out. We got to make sure that they're adhering to those. And for our governing bodies, judicial conduct, is that enough at this point to say this is a disparity that we can't have? So do we have to start issuing sanctions in that fashion? Is that the only way we're going to get to where we need? So we really do have to implement. It's penalties, it's sanctions, it's whatever. People aren't. If there's nothing to deter the behavior, we're not going to get there, or deter or incentivize. Because Robert talked about incentivizing earlier. When we're talking about diversity initiatives, is it payout? Is there a payout? Is there a bonus structure related to those initiatives? So we have to either have penalties or incentives to get where we need to go.
Right.
So we want to jump into our Q&A, Lonita. Thank you for those comments. Again, I mentioned, through just the normal flow of our conversation today, we've been actually going to address a lot of these items for sure. One we want to dive right into is about the role of white communities, and specific, this term anti-racism, right? Being non-racist was the historical term. We saw a lot, just, hey, don't be racist, don't be racist. But now there's been no, silence is being complicit. So this concept of anti-racism means to be widely engaged. You can't simply not be racist. You have to speak out against, that the things you see, that off-color comment that's made maybe among your group or whatever the case may be. How does that concept play into the conversation? And just, we touched on it a little bit earlier, but I'm just curious any additional thoughts you may want to add to the importance, because it speaks to allyship, but I think it's a little bit beyond, because allyship might be in front of us. We're at the rally together. But what do you do in your respective circle?
I think it's when I talked about earlier, do I say something and be perceived as the angry Black woman because I've called something out? Or should, that our ally who is practicing anti-racism, they don't look as threatening when they call it out. It's one thing for me to say, hey, this is racist. It's another thing for someone who looks like them to call them out on their racist behavior. So, I'm not against the term. And I think it's necessary for people to not just be, to say, hey, I'm not racist, but to actively call out racism when they see it. And that's my understanding of what the anti-racism philosophy is about, so.
Yeah, I wish we could just flip a light switch and people would okay, and now I understand what I'm supposed to do. It doesn't work that way. So I think it's a moment of education, of conversation. And I think it's a great opportunity for us, as you say, to sort of bring our authentic self to the table for that discussion. and to use examples of what it means to be an ally, what it means to speak up as an ally, what it means to put your personal capital on the table to defend as an ally. And I think more of that is going to be necessary for us to achieve any sort of level of anti-racist response to circumstances that we face in the future. But I think this is a period of education. And by the way, you know, I say flip a light switch because I don't think people change overnight what they do. But we can create habit. And the habit of having these conversations, of creating these moments of education and these opportunities for people to experiment with what that means, gives us a chance over time to develop a culture that will then impact any of those challenges I think that we face.
So Robert and Lenita, you both talked about the importance of placing persons of color in leadership, right? How would you address pushback from a profession that suggests that these efforts for the sake of diversity are at the exclusion of others? You know, how do we balance inclusivity against merit?
Against what?
Merit.
I didn't know they were distinct. I thought they were the same. Oh, I'm sorry. Great. Go ahead, Lenny.
I mean, who gets to say who was the most qualified? What was the merit hire? What does a merit hire mean? Like, what does it mean that we're excluding people who are qualified? And when you talk about having a person of color at the leadership, that's but one. Usually, we're lucky to get but one person. There's still 5 out there, and I'm just throwing out numbers, but there's going to be non-minority leaders also there. Like, leadership isn't one person. So to say that we're excluding people, no, we're trying to get at the table that we need to be at to have the honest conversations that need to be had. So we're not excluding anybody. We're trying to get there. So we're trying to make it inclusive.
You know, there's another point that the question raises that I think ought to be addressed, and that is this. All of us in this conversation come to the table with fairly unique and varied experiences that start from the moment we were born, that shape us and that give us a perspective about problems, issues, solutions that somebody of a different culture doesn't have. And when you are dealing with a multicultural client base and a global set of problems, believe me, you need all the angles to look at something that you can possibly find. And so merit then becomes, what do you bring to the table that I don't have? And I have always, and I'm sure I'm speaking for many of you, I have always had to distinguish myself from my colleagues, among my colleagues, as to what was my value. What did I bring to the table that somebody else didn't have? And I thought about my life that way. Why does this all-white firm want me in it? What is it that I bring that they don't have? And it is a constant reminder that we are always going to be asked the question, are we qualified? The question is, do we know the answer to that personally? And if you don't know the answer to that, then you are hoping and wishing somebody will like you. And you can't do that in this profession. You have to know who you are. You have to know what you can do. And you have to be very clear and confident that this is your value proposition. If you take it, we win. If you don't, I'm going to be in the other firm that's going to kind of wreak havoc on you.
That's right.
There you go.
That's right. So we got one last question, and this one is a blended one because we saw this comment come in pretty frequently. So we want to get This one final remark. So briefly, if you have a chance to, maybe 30 seconds each before we go to your closing remarks. It's important. This conversation has been phenomenal. But as a young lawyer, something that is big, in our world is, what's the advice when you're the younger lawyer? You're working for maybe a government role. You lack authority, decision-making power, but you'd like to impact or influence change, influence agency culture. Or maybe you've got aspirations for future career roles, i.e. career on the bench, right? But how I speak up might, impact me. If I don't speak up, does that make me complicit? What insight, advice you give to those individuals, like all of us, no matter who you are, have a concern about career aspirations and how what I do may impact those things?
I will say the reason I left the public defender's office is because I felt like I didn't have a place to speak up, right? And I say that to leadership. I felt like my perspective, my opinion wasn't necessarily valued. So I was like, well, it's one thing to get beat up in court every day, representing the individuals who can't afford counsel, but it's different to come back to the office and my values still not welcome here. When I joined the prosecutor's office, you interview with the head elected official, and when he told me that, it's to do what I felt was the right thing to do, I took that and I ran with it while there. Now that's still not to say you can't go out talking media. You got to be careful what you post on social media, because anything you say reflects on the elected official, things like that. When I left the city attorney's office and I went into, came to Aguilar's office, I had an opportunity to go work for the mayor, and it was a nice opportunity. And at that point is when I said, and I'm weighing the two positions, and I go, when I turned down that position, I said, I've done my time in government, and it's time for me to go out and actually, and to be able to use my voice fully. So I made that decision of, that's why I'm leaving the government world, because you do have those restrictions. But while you're in those offices, you have to reach out. People see the elected office official and they run the other way. Me, I'm like, hey, and I talked to him. I had no problem. He knew who I was. I knew who he was. And for that, I felt like, he valued my opinion in a lot of regards, and it helped me move up within that office. So don't be so afraid to use your voice that you lose yourself.
Yeah, that's a great point. Rob, anything you want to quickly add before we go to closing?
Yeah, I think it's just, it's sort of to take a different spin on what Lanita said, and that is, as a young lawyer, you've got to be willing to take a risk. You can't be safe in this profession and culture if you're not willing to put something on the line, put some skin in the game. And if you're willing to take a risk, there's a chance that you will get beat back. There's also a greater chance that you will do something to advance yourself, because people are going to see you as having raised your hand. You don't have to do it at every battle. You don't have to do it on every occasion. But if you never raise your hand, you are taking no risk. If you take no risk, there is no reward. That's my.
That's right.
Well, Lanita and Robert, you have both shared very powerful perspectives today, and thank you so much for being here. As we bring our program to a close, we want to acknowledge and thank our president, Judy Perry Martinez, and our chair, Logan Murphy. We thank you again, Robert and Lanita. Both of you have set an example of professional excellence and leadership that provides really a blueprint for young lawyers across the nation. So thank you so much for your candor, for your passion, and for your time. And thank you to everyone in the audience for taking the time to join us today.
And as we bring this to a close, I'm gonna give each of you this wonderful quick opportunity, and it's gotta be 30 seconds or less because we gotta move. But you've shared very powerful perspectives for us today. And all we wanna know is, to close, if you had your crystal ball, to end with your vision for the future. You've called these young lawyers to join you both in the trenches. And if they answer the call very quickly, where do you see America in 10 years?
I think it is going to be much improved. And the reason is because I think that we have to resolve ourselves to make a choice. We have got to choose to take a chance if we want to be the change we want to see.
And I think that's like, that's excellent. We have to be the change we want to see. And I think that we're doing that. And if we use our voice, we will create that change.
Well, thank you, Lanita and Robert, again. We hope to all of our viewers, this conversation enriched your perspective, renewed your energy, and challenged you to answer the call. Young lawyers have a critical responsibility as officers of the legal system and as public citizens as well to pursue and ensure the quality of justice in America. So we encourage you to educate yourself, get plugged in, and take action. You have to first have awareness, and recognize your accountability, of course, take action. Time is now. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.